I'll concede your point just for brevity. But
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right? Yeah,
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like what 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Well, I didn't even say that well. Welcome back to the Buck Around. I didn't say that one well either, but I'm going to go with it. Episode 326 of the Buck Around. I am one half of the Buck Around. Richard Branch, joined as always by my chatty colleague, Maxwell Brusky, because we've been here for 17 minutes, but who's counting before we actually hit the button? Max, how are you, sir?
Time flies when you're having fun.
Clearly.
That's all I can say. That's all I can say.
Before we start, and I make our special guest here sit in silence for one more second before we introduce him, I have to mention something very important, since it is episode 326. And do you remember what episode 325 was, Max?
Prop bets, prop bets, prop bets.
Oh, I thought that was
Get him in.
I thought that was Bad Boys at first, but then you went on to something else. But
Kind of like it.
yeah, it was prop bets. And you know what I did wrong at the end of the show that neither of us caught?
What?
I gave the wrong URL for the Patreon. For people to put in their prop bets. It is not buckaround.com/Patreon, as I said at the end of the episode. It is patreon.com/buckaround. Although I did say it right at the top. And if you have any doubts, the easiest way to get there is go to our Twitter feed. I have it pinned at the top there for now, where you can go get the link for the Google form and get your entry in before kickoff, which is 8 Central Friday? Is that what time it is? I forget what time
8 Central.
is. I believe
8
that's
Central.
right. So yeah, do that. And then you know what else I forgot, Max? Or no, I'm putting blame on both of us. Do you know what we both forgot? So you need to be apologetic for this to see one from Andy.
What now?
What do people need to do Friday night once the game is over?
Well, you got to call the talk around line.
Thank you. How do
whether
you do
it's
that?
whether it's good or bad,
Correct.
and it is. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. I knew
That's
it
what I wanted to see.
was 7-7 Bucky, and I can't remember.
That's right.
That's not quite it yet.
Now, what's the area code?
I don't know. I don't call it.
I'm ashamed of you. It is 347-77 Bucky. Everybody, call the talk around. We actually have some stuff in there from before that we haven't touched. But what does that mean?
Just to be clear, okay.
No,
You know,
this sounds like
347-77 Bucky is the line, but it's only open during the playing portion of the season.
That's
So-
not true. It's open all year.
It's
Max.
open all year, but we're
It's a
not
Google
taking
Voice
calls,
line.
are we?
Yes, I mean,
It's open 24/7, 365.
it's not like it's ringing into my bedroom. I mean, it goes straight to a voice. It's like I'm picking it up at 3 a.m. like,
Thank God for that.
Mr. President, there's a situation and wherever. No.
What about when Paul from Madison calls? Not even
well,
know.
then it flashes red. So anyways, yeah, patreon.com/buckaround, top post on there. You can find the link to the Google Sheet or go to our Twitter feed. You'll see the pinned post. Had to get that in before we start, but I'm very excited tonight. You know why? We found an easy way to clean up one of our mistakes.
We did, and it's really cool because we both happened upon it and independently happened upon it.
We did.
We did, and our guests should know that. That was
Yeah.
both of us had the same exact idea. Like, dude, we got somebody to call in.
So we got an idea. Yeah. So at the end of last show, if you were listening, I said, let's talk about after we wrap up. I have an idea, which was, hey, I was cutting my grass the other day and listening to this delightful preview of the Big Ten. And I'm like, wait a second. I know 50% of this podcast. Like, I know 50% of this podcast listens to our podcast. Why don't we ask said 50% of this podcast to come on our show, as they were working through every single team in the Big Ten, and they could help us wrap this up as an easy out. And you said,
I said, dang, Rich, I was sitting out on my patio at about like midnight, well into my evening. I think I was listening to Little Feat, and I think something in one of those songs reminded me, running for the roses. Wait a minute.
yes.
We got a guy.
So
We got a guy.
this has been the longest introduction to any guest ever, and he's been sitting very patiently. We would very much like to welcome Lucas Rohde from Running for the Roses, the podcast that is all things college football, because they like to make their life easy there and actually have
Yeah.
100 and, well, they basically do Power 4, but they give themselves 60 teams to talk about instead of one. Lucas, thank you so much for joining us and agreeing to basically help us, like, I don't know what we want to call this, like, shovel up all the manure that is the rest of the Big Picture series for the summer. I don't know why I couldn't come up with
really
anything.
bad.
So congratulations.
I guess. Hopefully, I'm the shoveler and not the manure.
Yes, that's
to
the
help
idea.
fill you guys there. But
Rest assured. Yes.
but no, I really, really appreciate it. Been a long time listener to this podcast for the Buck Round. I think I started listening to it. I was still in college at UW, probably like in 2014, 2015. Was honestly pretty bummed when y'all stopped after the 2018 season, but was super stoked last year when you guys came back. So and it's been awesome. Obviously, Rich, we talked quite a bit on Twitter, talking about numerous different things, and was more than happy to come on. So I appreciate it.
Well, yes, thank you for being here. Sorry, that was a mute with a cough, so it took away my chance for a witty retort. But yeah, no, seriously, thanks for coming on. So as we said, Lucas and Ryan did the whole, what are they, like 27 teams in the Big Ten now? I don't even know the number.
Yeah.
They did them all over 2 episodes, and I was like, hey, maybe we could do a little compressed one on the 6 teams we haven't covered in the conference, because Max and I have a guest for Alabama week, which we'll do Alabama week, but Lucas can help us work through the rest of these. So I think without further ado, and so that we're not doing this all night, you want to get cracking, Max?
And I stress the ado part, because there's a lot of freaking ado. And Lucas, you were very patiently waiting. And,
Yes.
and it means that you have become a true pro at podcasting, because you can wait through all that.
Exactly.
That's impressive. So
All right, let's get going. And you know what I didn't realize, Max, until we were doing this? Basically,
Yeah.
every team we haven't covered is the back half of the schedule, excepting Alabama. Because we did USC, we did Purdue, and we did Rutgers. And those are
Mhm.
the first 3 conference games. So it's the entire
Right.
back of the conference schedule. So let's break out our pumpkin spice latte. We start October 19th with Northwestern, Lucas. Tell us. They won 8 games last year. They were supposed to be terrible. We don't want to talk about the Badger game, but what do you think they have in place for 2024? How good will they be?
They were an interesting team to cover, not just because for what they had last year. So if y'all went back to me and Ryan's podcast in 2023, this was before the Pat Fitzgerald situation all happened. I think their win total was like 2.5 or 3. We both took the under. We thought that team was going to be absolute dog crap going in. And then obviously they do what they did. We were talking about, Max, we were talking about before the pod how the last game we met up at tailgate, how frustrating it was to watch Northwestern play Wisconsin that day back in 2017. Last year was probably the most frustrated I've ever been watching a Wisconsin team play against Northwestern. It was brutal. It was everything. I think you got to give David Braun a heck. He deserved winning Big Ten Coach of the Year. That being said, I do think everything went right for Northwestern that could have went right, obviously, last year. I don't think that's going to happen 2 years in a row. They do return a lot. They return 7 starters on offense, 8 starters on defense. They are having to replace Ben Bryant, who was their starting quarterback last year, performed fairly well for them. They do bring Mike Wright in from Vanderbilt. They do return some key contributors on their offensive line. However, they do lose arguably their best defense or offensive lineman in Prevey to he ended up actually entering the transfer portal. And I just think it's kind of a fluky year because I think you look at their schedule, there's going to be a ton of toss up games. They're bringing in a whole new coaching staff, too. So David Braun basically got rid of just about everybody except for a couple of pieces on Fitzgerald's old staff. Am interested to see what they do on offense. They brought in Zach Lugan, who was the FCS coordinator of the year last year for South Dakota State. For those not too familiar with South Dakota State, they're basically the premier conference right now. They've overpassed North Dakota State in the FCS.
And,
They
and just to be clear, Wisconsin is not playing South Dakota State
they're playing
in
South
2
Dakota.
weeks. They're playing
Yes.
South Dakota, but that's an important distinction. Even though South Dakota is pretty darn good for an FCS team, but yeah, it is not SDSU. Go ahead.
But we'll be interested to see how they look on offense. They do return, 3 of their top 4 receivers. They do return Cam Porter at running back. They also return some key contributors on defense. So despite all that, even though they won 8 games last year, I highly doubt they're going to reach that, mainly because I think they took advantage of a Big Ten West. And we'll talk about this probably with like Minnesota and some of these other teams, Purdue, that played in the Big Ten West last year. I think pretty much most of the teams in the Big Ten West are improved, even though the division is not there anymore. So I think they're going to have a tougher time beating those opponents. But also you take into the fact they're not even playing. They're playing in a makeshift, like when Wisconsin plays them, they're playing in a makeshift, basically practice field, right on the shores of Lake Michigan. The views are going to be beautiful, but the wind will not be. And then later in the year, they're playing at Wrigley Field, where, to be honest, it'll probably feel like an away game atmosphere there. So I think they play Illinois and Ohio State. I know they play for sure at Wrigley Field.
Ohio State at Wrigley Field and Illinois is at Soldier Field. That's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. But that will probably be filled with majority Illinois fans, I would imagine, at that game. So to me, like, they were a great story last year, but I think you could maybe consider this more of a year 1 type of situation for Coach Braun and their staff going into the season.
Yeah, I think to top all that off last year, they beat Utah in their bowl game. And I think Utah is pretty much of a consensus pick to win the Big 12, aren't they?
They are. Now, they were playing without Utah played all last year without their starting quarterback.
They did, right.
Cam Rising. That being said, it was still impressive. I'm not taking anything away. What Northwestern did last year was insanely impressive. I just think every little possible thing that went right for them did happen. I mean, they even had toss-up games. You look at some of their wins. I mean, this was a team that only beat Howard by 3 points last year. They beat Illinois only by 2 points last year, in which they gave up 43 points to that Illinois offense. They only beat Purdue by 1 score. They had to go to overtime against Minnesota. And early in the year, I mean, they were a mess. I mean, they got absolutely demolished by Rutgers. I remember they were an underdog at one point to UTEP at home the second week of the season. And then they also got manhandled by Duke, who they also have to play this year too. So I think it was kind of lightning in the bottle. They won a lot of toss-up games. And then you add in the fact that they have to play Ohio State, Michigan, obviously Wisconsin as well. They go on the road at Washington. I just think all the teams on the schedule are better than they were last year. So could they still be good and make a bowl game? Yeah. But do I think they're going to win 8 games again this year? I don't see that.
Yeah, Wisconsin doesn't play them until, like we talked about, it is, on the latter half or starting the latter half of the season.
Sure.
But I don't know if I'll be interested to see how the curse, of road games at Northwestern over the last 20 years plays into it, because that stadium is just going to be so weird. Do you know what the capacity of that thing is?
I think they said it's around 15,000.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, that's Northwestern, and Rich is saying, dude, it's enough for Northwestern.
Too much.
Max, we have 6 more teams to go, sir.
And they're more interesting than Northwestern, right?
And we have an audience that, there's only so much Northwestern they can do. They can't see me pointing at my watch as I do that. This is how I tame Max. Penn State.
Facts.
Let's do Penn State. They won 10 games again. They lost to Michigan and Ohio State. I mean, they lost to Michigan and Ohio State again. They lost. Who did they play in the bowl? Was it Ole Miss?
Ole Miss.
Ole Miss.
10
and
and
they got
3.
handled.
Yeah. What's the deal? Can they be
So
better or are they worse?
So last year, I was insanely high on Penn State. I actually bet them to win the Big Ten last year. I thought they finally have a set of QB. It felt like offensively they might take a step in year two under Mike Yurcich, their offensive coordinator. Manny Diaz was doing a fantastic job running their defense, and they were basically the same team they were. Bular put up great numbers, except when they played good teams. They ran the ball okay, and their defense was really, really good. And like you said, it resulted in 10 wins. I think they're going to be around that same team again this year. Um, that being said, I don't know if their running game is going to be as good. They lost 3 starters on the offensive line, including a first-round draft pick and Ola Fashanu. They did bring in a new offensive coordinator, so in Andy Kolenicki, who I've personally have really, really liked from afar. When especially us Wisconsin guys too. Um, uh, if you followed, I'm a huge Lance Leipold fan, at the head coach at Kansas from his days at UW Whitewater. That's what's crazy. Andy Kolenicki was the offensive coordinator at UW Whitewater just about a decade ago.
Oh, wow.
And now he's worked his way up, follow Lance Leipold. That offensive Kansas, you watch them, really, really fun to watch, with not great talent. And we're able to get really big explosive plays. If they're able to do that at Penn State, I think they have a shot to be very, very good this year, because I think the defense with Abdul Carter and that defensive front is going to be really dang good. I love that they brought in Tom Allen to replace Manny Diaz, the former head coach at Indiana. I think that'll be a natural fit right there. But my worry is the offensive line. Can Drew Alar actually be productive against good defenses? And also, who are they going to throw the ball to? Keandre Lambert Smith, their leading receiver last year, transferred to Auburn. They did bring in Julian Fleming, but there just isn't, there's nobody up, there's just not a dude that you can point to that, say, like Michigan has had over the past couple of years, or obviously Ohio State has had. And even newcomers in the Big Ten, Oregon, Washington, USC. And that's where I am really, really worried with Penn State. And it just gets to a point, if they go 9-3 this year, how does that fan base feel with James Franklin? I think I saw a stat. He's like 3-15
Yeah.
against top 10
It's
teams.
3 and a
like
lot
that.
for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So to me, I'm not sold until I believe it. I bet on them high last year. I am not doing the same mistake again this year. Even their first game in Morgantown this weekend, I think we're going to learn a lot about them too. I don't think that's going to be an easy game at all. So a little bit further down there. Love the defense, but a little bit worried about the offense.
Yeah, they remind me a lot of Wisconsin and the Bielema and Christ era. I mean, you beat up on everybody else, but you can never win the big game. Listeners of this show know that I cannot stand James Franklin. I just think he's an overrated blowhard who winds up getting decent assistance. And I think, what was it? Was it 2017? Or I think it was 2017 when they were like 1-4, and they beat Minnesota, and it kind of turned everything around, and things have been kind of back to then. And it's the same. For my part, I'll be interested to see, at least when Wisconsin plays them, how Wisconsin's season has gone. I mean, it should be, and it's a home game. It should be a night game. If Wisconsin's got some good stuff under its belt, if they're able to get a couple wins, it's kind of crazy when you think that Wisconsin has not beaten Penn State since 2011, especially in 2021. I mean, that game was there for the taking.
I was at that game, and I still remember seeing Graham Mertz missing a wide open Chimbre DK in the back of the end zone in the final minute of that game. So,
Me too.
Yeah, they should have beat, and they had 2 fumbles, I think, in the red zone. They had, well, I'm not going to dwell on past experiences there, but it's too harsh. But no, I completely agree. I'm really interested to see where those two seasons are kind of colliding there, because I do think that is a winnable game for Wisconsin if Penn State, especially if Penn State is the team I'm kind of expecting them to be this season.
You can say whatever you want about Iowa.
I can say whatever I want.
Yeah, you can ask Lucas whatever you want. How about that?
Well, no, we brought Lucas on to talk to him. I mean, my take on Iowa, and I will be at Kinnick Stadium, so everybody knows. Plan that one out for a while. Wisconsin's on a 2-game losing streak with them though, and some really, really, really frustrating games. 2022 was pretty frustrating just because Iowa, I think, had, what did they have, 26 total yards in the game?
It was 60. It was the fewest total yards they had in a win since like World War II. Like
Yeah.
it was bad.
Yeah.
It was
I mean, it's
bad.
something absurd, like
Yeah.
something just totally absurd. And Cooper DeJean's gone, so that's a good thing for Wisconsin. And it looks to me like Iowa's defense is going to be just as good. And I don't know if they'll have a player like DeJean, but they'll have pretty close to that at all three levels. But I mean, for them, of course, it's the offense, and I don't know if a coordinator change is going to make a difference. I think Cade McNamara being back and having, but he hasn't played in 2 years. I mean, that's an interesting one. Northwestern, talk about, they got Brendan Sullivan.
Mm-hmm.
That might help, but I don't know if they have any stars in the backfield. They have tight ends like they always do, but I don't know if they're difference makers. But wide receivers, what do
I
they
mean,
got?
they still have Luke Lachey, right? Who
Yeah.
missed a lot of last year due
Mhm.
to injury. I'm assuming he'll be pretty good. They do return their top two rushers in both Caleb Johnson, um, and also LaShawn Williams. I'm worried a little bit about Cade McNamara. I don't know if you guys read his stats coming out of. I know it was just a scrimmage that they did here at the end of the summer, but apparently he was. I think it was like 7 of 20 for 20 yards in 2 picks or something like that in their
Deacon
final
Hill-esque,
scrimmage.
if you will.
Yes. So, and Deacon Hill's no longer there to save them this year. But you mentioned they do lose Cooper DeJean, but they still have another All-American DB in Sebastian Castro. They had 2 really good linebackers in both Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson. Both had over 100 tackles last year. You mentioned it, Max. Their defense is going to be really, really good. I think I had heard a stat. This is Kirk Ferentz's oldest defense in like a decade, which
Holy cow.
they I think the average age is over 22 years old for their starters.
Oh, wow.
So to me, that is just a recipe that Iowa wants to have. Like you said, it's going to come back to the offense. Does Tim Lester, their new offensive coordinator, make that big of a difference? Because we can say, even if Cade McNamara or Brendan Sullivan is the answer, I mean, they're wide receivers. You have Seth Anderson and Caleb Brown. I mean, their leading receiver last year, I don't even think had over 300 yards receiving.
No.
So, and it's not like they've brought in. I mean, they didn't bring. I don't think they brought in one transfer besides Caden Proctor, who's no longer on the team now. I think that was their only transfer portal addition, and now it's a subtraction. So they do return 4 starters on the offensive line, but to me, it's just if they can play the defense that they've had, their schedule's manageable. I still think this is a team that still can win probably 8 to 10 games, even if their offense just mightily improves this year. Just because I have so much faith in Phil Parker and that defense. But they do not have Torrey Taylor. That is a loss,
that's
even
true.
though it's a punter.
Yeah.
Still a major, major loss for them. We'll see how they adjust to that. But they always have good specialists. So once again, not too worried.
Are they getting somebody from the Australian punting factory again, or no?
Yeah, I was just going to say that they have another Aussie guy.
Oh, thank goodness.
I mean, yeah, but Torrey Taylor. I mean, is there any more Iowa of a star than Torrey Taylor? I mean, he was drafted 3rd. The Bears went back into the draft to take him. Like, just amazing.
He was a weapon, and it wasn't until you played them that you like realized it too. When it was like you feel like you would win the field position battle, and then they would just completely reset it. And it was honestly like that game last year was so demoralizing when that would happen every time,
right?
Too. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too is that they had Taylor for the last 2 years, but they also had Cooper DeJean returning punts, who was easily one of the top returners in the country.
Mm-hmm.
That was the difference against Wisconsin. I think he had in 2022 he had a punt return, I think, within the 10-yard line.
Yep.
And a pick six.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm always interested to see how they how the offense is going to change. I shouldn't say always, but I'm interested to see whether it'll make a difference. Those running backs are pretty solid, and I think this is probably one of the better O lines that they've had
Mhm.
in the last couple of years. But how much it's going to help, I don't know. I don't
And
know.
it's my and also too, does the offense change with Kirk being there? I feel like Kirk feels like he has to prove that you can still win a certain way with the way college is
Sure.
changing. I feel like there's a stubbornness there that I don't trust. But like I said, it's Iowa. To me, they're the most annoying team to play year after year, and they'll be annoying again this year too. I fully, wholeheartedly believe that.
As a fan, it's definitely the game that I want to win the most,
Yes.
for sure, without
as
question.
as someone who I grew up 10 minutes from the Iowa border near
Yes.
Dubuque,
Yeah.
and I grew up loathing that state so much and still do. So
You're, I don't have the
yeah.
same feelings, but I know you're not alone.
Yes, yes. Iowa City's great though. Iowa City is great though, if you get a
It is.
chance to.
Yeah, no
Let me
doubt.
take you two out of the anger and the darkness here. Let's transition to a new opponent. All right. Following Iowa, Badgers get to play Oregon. 12-2 last year, lost by, I think they lost 2 games by a total of 6 points, both Washington.
Mhm.
I'm assuming they're pretty much a murder machine again. Is that fair to say? Do you think they're just winning? I mean, are they your pick to win the Big Ten at this point, or are they most likely in your mind?
They are. So we picked Ohio State. I picked both me and my partner Ryan. We picked both Ohio State and Oregon to make it to Indianapolis for the Big Ten title game. We both have Ohio State winning, but it's close. And what's crazy about Oregon, I think this will be the best team Wisconsin plays all year. And yes, that's higher than Alabama, just
Mhm.
with all the transition that Alabama's going through. Oregon is set to win this year. This might be the best Oregon team talent wise that they may have ever had. And the crazy part is they lost a first round draft pick at quarterback. They lost 1,000-yard wide receiver in Troy Franklin. They lost their leading rusher. They also lost an All American center. And yet, this offense might be just as good, if not better, than it was a year ago. Because they bring in Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, who was very good at Oklahoma, was at UCF. Prior to that, um, Jordan James and Noah Whittington both return at running back. Noah Whittington was supposed to be their number 2 guy last year. He got hurt. He's back now for them. Jordan James rushed for over 600 yards for them. Their offensive line might be the best, one of the best in the country still, even after losing an All American center. They returned 3 starters, and also the 2 transfers they brought in on there, Johnny Cornelius from Rhode Island and Matthew Bedford from Indiana, were 2 of the most sought after offensive line transfer portal prospects that were out this past year. I think Johnny Cornelius had offers from just about every blue blood in the country and decided to go to Oregon. Oh yeah, and they also, despite losing 1,000-yard receiver, they still have a 1,000-yard receiver back in Tez Johnson. They also brought in Evan Stewart from Texas A&M, who was Texas A&M's leading receiver last year. Was also a former 5-star recruit. Very very talented, and that's just the offense. The
Yeah.
defense,
I know.
the defense probably made the biggest jump last year. They went from giving up about 27 points per game to about 16 points per game last year. They were one of the top units in the country. Dan Lanning knows how to coach defense. I mean, he was the defensive coordinator at Georgia prior to coming to Oregon, and they return a lot. Jordan Burks is back. He had 7.5 tackles for loss. They bring back Jamari Caldwell. They also brought in Derek Harmon from Michigan State, a defensive tackle who was very sought after in the transfer portal. They bring back 5 out of their top 6 linebackers. They did lose a little bit in the secondary to the NFL, guys like Evan Williams, he's with the Packers. They also lost Kyrie Jackson. But they brought in Jamar Muhammad, who was quarterback from their rival Washington, and he was first team All Pac-12 last year to replace him. They also brought in for safety Kobe Savage, who started 25 plus games at Kansas State too, who routinely puts out really really good defenses. This team's going to be really really good. I'm excited they're playing at Wisconsin. My first ever Wisconsin game was against Oregon back in 2000. Years ago, I was 8 years old, and I remember my aunt having to cover my ears when they started doing the eat spit fondue chants in the student section, but
That's awesome.
but no, Oregon they are loaded this year, and if they don't make the Big Ten title game, I think they have the second best roster outside of Ohio State this year. I would be very, very shocked, and they are a definite national title contender this season.
Yeah, I just see there's three drafted players. I think it's a third round, fourth round, sixth round, and you have 9 starters back.
Yep.
Talk about reload. I think the only thing you can think about Oregon potentially is, how their season will have gone to that point, or how
Mm-hmm.
Wisconsin's season has gone to that point. I just, if they lose to Ohio State, that'll be something, but I don't see another loss on their schedule.
No, and the one benefit Wisconsin might have, I think Oregon, when they play Wisconsin, it'll be the last of like 8 straight games that they've
Right.
played before a
Yep.
bye. And Wisconsin, I believe, will be coming off a bye after playing Iowa.
Correct.
So that does help. Because to me, like people make such a big deal about, oh, well, they're coming to Madison in November. It's like it gets cold in Oregon too. It's not like
Yes, it does.
this isn't LA where it'll be 65 and sunny probably when they leave the airport. Like, I don't see that being an issue. And like you said, they'll be battle tested. They get Ohio State at home, which will be an amazing game. I think we're going to see that game be played
Yeah, that's
twice.
the game of
But
the year. Yeah.
yeah, so but yeah, it'll be interesting there too. And like you said, where Wisconsin season's going well, like I kind of hope it does. That could be a massive night game potentially at Camp
Yeah.
Randall between 2 highly ranked opponents. But if Wisconsin's season goes sideways, what's going to be the buy? And that could be potentially rough. So, but yeah, I do think this will be the best team that Wisconsin plays. And I don't even think it's fairly close. I think Oregon is far and away superior to everyone else on their roster or on their schedule this season.
So at least for Wisconsin's part, they go from playing a currently great team to a once great team that Wisconsin has not lost to since 2012. That's that was the Danny O'Brien game. That's the last time
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska beat Wisconsin. And folks are talking, it's Nebraska back in a bowl, which is insane that you like that's a good thing. Like that's where we're at now. So uh Dylan Rayola aside, where do you see the Huskers coming in this year?
So I think they do make a bowl game. I think, when we did our podcast, so we like to do like win totals, like for betting. Their over under right now is 7.5. I think that is just crazy high. Just to give you an FYI, it was 7.5 2 years ago. In Scott Frost's final season. That was the
Yeah.
easiest money I think I've ever made. So it's just like they're coming off a 4-win year, and it's just like Nebraska like Penn State. Penn State's obviously had a lot of success, but it's the same thing. They got to prove it to me first. I really like Matt Rule. I think he knows what works in college football. I think he's a fantastic head coach. I like what he's done with that program so far, but they still have the stench. They still can't win close games to save their life. They were 5-3 last year. They lost their last 4 games, all by 1 possession. I don't know how Nebraska fans do it. That'd probably give me an aneurysm if that had happened to me, if you haven't made a bowl game in that long. But anyways.
They pray to Saint Dr. Tom. That's what they do.
Defense will be really, really good. They bring back, I thought Tony White, their defensive coordinator, who they brought in from Syracuse last year, did a really, really great job. And they run a very similar scheme to what I believe Wisconsin wants to run. They run a 3-3-5. He learned it from one of the architects of it in Rocky Long while he was at Syracuse. And they also gave him a huge raise. USC, a bunch of other blue bloods were trying to get him away out of Lincoln. They keep him back. I mean, they returned 9 starters on that side of the ball, led by what I think is one of the best names for a defensive lineman in Nash Hutmacher.
Yeah.
They also bring back Jamari Butler. And they can rotate guys. I think 5 of their top 6. And it's on the
there's Nash.
the biggest question is going to be offense. And Max, you brought up Dylan Raiola, probably the biggest recruit that they've had in some time. Obviously, a legacy from his dad who plays there. His uncle also plays there, who happens to actually be a Wisconsin alum, their offensive line coach. But um, my biggest question for them, they return a ton on offensive line. It's at receiver. They were not super productive there last year. They were really, really young. They had to play like guys like Malachi Coleman, who was a big recruit from them out of the Philly area. They had to play him probably a little bit earlier than what they wanted to. Now they do bring in Jamal Banks from Wake Forest, who was their leading receiver last year. He was fairly sought after. They also brought in Isaiah Nayor, who could be kind of a wild card for them. He was really, really good a couple of years ago at Wyoming. Went to Texas out of the transfer portal, tore his ACL back in 2022, and just kind of lost fit in their rotation. He ends up coming here. So if he gets the form, that gives you, I think, two pretty good weapons there on the outside for Aola. And then they also return, Anthony Grant is gone, but they do return Gabe Irvin and a couple of other running backs there too. So I think they're going to try to win games the same way that they did last year. The strength is going to be running the football for them and relying on their defense. And hopefully you can just get a little bit more with better talent at quarterback and better talent at receiver. And the thing is like their schedule, if you look at it before they play, there is a realistic chance they're undefeated before Halloween weekend going into Ohio State. And I hope that doesn't happen because the hype train on Nebraska would just be insane. Because they do have like Colorado, I think will be a tough game for them. I think Rutgers at home could potentially be too. And if Illinois is improved, maybe, but they get all three of those games at home, which I think helps them. So I do think this is a bowl team. Do I think they're like a dark horse to win the Big Ten this year? No. I think you still need another rotation of new recruits and things like that in there too. And also like it's a lot to put on a true freshman's plate to play on in an offense that was abysmal last year. And I'm not a big fan of Marcus Satterfield, their offensive coordinator. South Carolina, when he left there to go to Nebraska, South Carolina fans were not really upset at all, which I don't think is ever a good sign when you pluck another coordinator. So I'm still questionable on the offense, but I do think their running game and their defense is going to be good enough for them to at least get to a bowl game this year, which I think will be a success in Lincoln. They just need to get back to the postseason.
All right. So last team on the schedule, the illustrious Minnesota Golden Gophers. I am very curious. I don't know where you see it. We are definitely in, is it fair to say late stage PJ Fleck, or at least late middle stage PJ Fleck? It feels like at this point to me for some reason. I'm kind of curious what you think they're going to be. And then by extension, I am very curious what teams in sort of the Minnesota, Illinois, not Michigan State, because I think, well, I guess Michigan State tier of the Big Ten, like what they're going to look like when with this, the way this conference is going to be, because like obviously everyone kind of notches down, but I just don't know what it means for a team like Minnesota.
I don't know either, and it's weird with it being an 18-team league. Like what programs like Minnesota, what is considered a successful season for them,
Yeah.
kind of moving forward too, and to kind of answer your first question, Rich, like with PJ Fleck, I am fully convinced PJ Fleck is just trying to do everything he can to inch out a 7 or 8 win season here so he can parlay that into a different job. I am fully convinced I feel like he feels like he has done everything he can at Minnesota, at least
Okay.
from like a winning point. Like he got them an
Yeah.
11-win season. He had some 9-win years. Last year was a fallback. I think there was rumors that he was gunning hard for that UCLA job when that came open, and was kind of putting his name out for other Power 5 jobs or now Power 4. But to me, that's kind of what it feels like. Even though they're still recruiting decently okay, well, but and I don't hate their team this year. I think we're going to learn a lot on Thursday night when they play North Carolina. Just how good this team is. A lot of it is going to ride on pretty much with all these old Big Ten West teams is what is your quarterback play going to be like? It was absolutely abysmal this year. I think the Big Ten might have out of the Power 4 leagues you could put in the running might have the potentially worst quarterback play, at least coming into the season. The fact that, and look, I think I like Tyler Van Dyke. We'll talk about him probably in a little bit. But the fact that he could be a top 3 to 5 quarterback in this league coming into the preseason, I don't know if that is a great thing for the Big Ten, but we'll see. And like with them, Max Brosner, they moved on from Ethan Callie McManus. He's going to Rutgers. Nate Brex Mosner, who was really good at New Hampshire, was an FCS All-American at that level. But what's he going to look like, especially because it just came out this week. Darius Taylor, they're really, really who I think is a really good running back, and also Daniel Jackson, their leading receiver from last year. Both those guys are questionable. I don't think they're going to play this week. What do those injuries look like, and how does that set them back? Because they do have a lot returning on their offense and defensive line. Though I do worry the loss of Joe Rossi, who was their defensive coordinator the last how many years? He goes to Michigan State, which I don't know if that's a big step up for him, especially considering that's kind of a rebuild job there at Michigan State. To me, that worries me that maybe he didn't like what he had at Minnesota and maybe was just trying to reset the clock. They're at Michigan State. They had a decent amount of players transfer out of there this past year. So they do return, I think, 8 starters on defense. They did bring in Corey Hetherman, who was a linebackers coach at Rutgers. Joe Rossi formerly was at Rutgers before he came to Minnesota. So they'll probably run very, very similar schemes. But to me, if Max Brosner's good and they're healthy at wide receiver, if they can get someone to emerge behind Daniel Jackson, because I don't know who that's going to be, then maybe they can pull out maybe some wins. But also, like I said, they went 5-7 last year. Yes, they did have to play Ohio State and Michigan on their schedule, but they also had to play a really, really bad Big Ten West. And I think their schedule is way tougher this year as well. And you mentioned it, Rich, where they fit in with like an Illinois. You could even throw Purdue in there. Like those teams are just going to beat up on each other. And I could see Minnesota going 4-8, but I could also see them potentially going 8-4 if the defense is really good. They're healthy on offense, and Max Brosner's the real deal. It really, to me, comes down. I think quarterback play, obviously in football, is the biggest, I think, difference maker for certain teams. Max Brosner's good and efficient. I think they're going to keep themselves in a lot of football games. If he's not, I think it could be a long year.
I actually have really nothing to add about that. I'm glad you made the points about Fleck too, because and Rich, you did ask the question that I would have asked about Fleck, because it really does seem like not that he's at the end of the line or anything like that, but I mean, what more can you do at this point? And last year was it was a down year for them with not that bad of a schedule. I didn't think it was, but yeah,
they did go bowling at 5-7. I guess that's they probably hung that banner up at PCF Bank Stadium. So
we can't have a Badger podcast without.
No, and just with Fleck too. One, very weird. I don't know if y'all have noticed, but if you look at pictures from like 4 or 5 years ago, he looks like a completely different human.
Rich is going, oh yeah.
And to be fair, I did look this up. Apparently he did have surgery. I guess he broke some optical bone like around his eye, and he had to get like facial, like reconstructive surgery. But it's like, he doesn't even look like the same person anymore. It is odd.
It's when he started wearing the capri pants to the booster events. It all started with that, and something happened. I'm just telling you.
Then he started shaving his head. He didn't even try to grow out the hair anymore. Yeah. Which makes me think, and that leads me to it. Like I said, I think he is trying to etch out an 8-4, especially with the way the Big Ten is set up now. It's going to be harder than what it already was at Minnesota. I just think he is trying to stretch it out so that he can move somewhere else next year. End it on a high note. Say, hey, I did really, really well at a program that consistently wasn't performing super well, and we outperformed most of our expectations, and I'm going to reset the clock somewhere else. That's how I feel about Minnesota.
Never lost a bowl game.
That's true. And they played they won their first New Year's bowl game since like the 1960s or whatever back in 2019. So once again, they'll hang that banner up too. Along with their Big Ten West Division Championship back in 2019. They were co-champs apparently.
5-time national champion or something like that.
Yeah.
Don't forget.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. Fleck he's no Benny Bierman, but I mean, but he's like the Glenn Mason or Jerry
Yeah.
Kill or and anybody that's I think he's right there with those guys and even, has things that he did there that they did not.
Yeah.
And
And
I don't know if you could say you never lost a bowl game either. I think that's pretty solid.
a big deal. And look, I love crapping on the guy, but I think he's done a really nice job there for what Minnesota is. I still think they're lagging behind a lot in NIL. We've seen that they've gotten a lot of
Yeah.
assistant
I've
coaches
heard that too.
poached
Yeah.
over the last few years too. So I think there's some resource allocation issues. I think there as well. And like I said, it's Minnesota. It's not a historically great program, but he's also made the rivalry I think a lot more fun too because they've actually beaten us.
Before we go, we can't let you go without. I mean, you're allowed. Tell us what's going to happen to Wisconsin this year. We wouldn't make you come here and not let you give your 2 cents.
So before you start, feel free to comment at least on these first 2 games.
So I literally looked at Western Michigan for I think the first time today. I think I read the 24/7 on Badger 24/7. I read their preview. My whole thing is I just want them to look better in these 2 non-con games than they did last year.
Yep.
Last year, that offense was so hard to watch, even against Buffalo and Georgia Southern. If Georgia Southern doesn't throw like 5 picks in that game, they seriously probably could have beaten us. I mean, they threw for almost 400 yards through the air. They were moving the ball. We couldn't do anything. And those were not good, not just good teams, but they weren't good defenses. Western Michigan had a terrible, I think they were ranked like 84th in total defense last year. They even lost some guys to the transfer portal. These are teams you need to beat. And I know South Dakota is a number 5 FCS team. I don't care. Montana State was like a top 10 FCS team, and they had to come back down from 17 to New Mexico, who won 1 game in the Mountain West last year. Right. So, like, yes, they're high, but like you're a Big Ten team. These teams, they should beat them by 3 or 4 scores. That's all I want to see. I want to see the offense put up 40 to 50 points in each of these 2 games and just look competent in what they're doing. That like, hey, we've spent the last year plus now in this offense. We look more comfortable. That's really what I want to see in those first 2 games. I'll be up there on Friday night. Hopefully I'm not pulling my damn hair out because we're only up 17-7 late in the 3rd quarter against Western Michigan.
I know.
And that's the other thing too. And I think the defense has a chance to be really, really, really good this year. Even with the injury to Thompson, I still think they're going to be really, really good. I think, and I agree with your guys' assessment of the team. I don't know if necessarily like the top positions are better, but I just think they have more guys that they can throw out this year where they can rotate more players. I just think they're deeper at pretty much every position, maybe besides offensive line. But I like the starting 5, I think, better this year, especially at center, than I did a year ago. All respect to Bordellini, those snaps just drove me just bonkers last season, even though he did everything else great. And he might actually be starting for the Colts at center too, which I think is kind of hilarious. But anyway,
I will say this about that, at least on the other side of the ball. My son, the Cincinnati Bengals fan, informed me that Muma made the 53.
Yeah,
for Cincinnati. So who knows?
Who knows? Fit is everything, and I just think our linebackers last year did not fit at all what they wanted to do. Like Jordan Turner, like when they lost Jordan Turner, I was like, look, respect him, had a good career. I did not think that was a substantial loss for us at all. But my view on the Badger team is very similar to yours. Like especially Rich, I was so surprised when I heard your overview of the team, just because I knew Max was going to be overly optimistic because I'm always overly optimistic. I thought Rich was going to kind of bring us back, but I think 8-4 is the floor with this team. I think the offense is going to be much better. I think it helps. They're much deeper at running back this year. If they have an injury at that position, it's not going to necessarily kill that spot like it did last year. I think the wide receiver group is way more talented. I'm excited to see Tretch be fully. Hopefully, he stays healthy because I think he's going to be a huge weapon for them. I also just, like I said, I already mentioned the defense. I think it's going to be much improved. I think their secondary is going to be one of the best in the Big Ten. Obviously, with Hunter Wooler, Ricardo Hallman, but everything they say out of not just Nicer Forkery, but Max Lofi, all the stuff Fickle's been saying about them was the same exact stuff he was saying about Ricardo Hallman last year. And Hallman he's a preseason All-American now coming into the season. I like their depth at safety. I think having those good linebackers will help maybe some of the issues we have at defensive line. So I do think we're going to struggle maybe against some of the more run-heavy teams, but I do think we're going to match up actually very nicely against teams like USC, Oregon, who are going to want to throw the ball deep down the field. I think we'll be able to help contain that, but I think they're going to be, kind of like you guys are saying, I think more competent. I think they're going to beat the teams they should beat, like the Northwesterns, the Purdue's, Rutgers. I don't think they're going to have like huge issues with them. I do think they're going to take an upset or two. If they finish, I've heard some experts say, or not experts, but some even like the writers for Wisconsin, like, I think Wisconsin fans might be happy with 7-5 because of this schedule. And I'm like, I think 7-5 is like a massive disappointment this year.
I think so too.
Like, yeah. I think we want to see improvement. Our goal is not for us to just compete. We've seen that before. Our goal is not to just compete with these teams. It is to actually beat them from time to time too. And I do think they're going to nab an upset or two this year. So I think 8-4 with the potential of maybe going 9-3. And if everything goes right for them, if they stay healthy on the offensive line, Tyler Van Dyke kind of returns at least somewhat close to his freshman form. I mean, I don't think 10 games is like winning 10 games is like insane. I don't think it's likely, but I don't think it's insane to think about if the chips go right for them this year.
That's the way I'm going to be. I am going full throttle this year. I'm just seeing if it changes some. This is, you know what? I watched a hobby horsing video. So now I just, it lightened my heart. And that's what Running for the Roses needs, by the way, is more hobby horsing. And
what is hobby horsing?
My friend, go on YouTube. You know what? Go check the Buck Around Twitter feed. I put the specific video that I watched on there.
Okay.
And then you can learn all about it.
Dude,
but yeah, just so you know, also in Buck Around East Coast headquarters, one son of Richard Branch has the exact same prediction as you. He said 8-4 to me tonight, and he said it's Bama, Oregon, Penn State, and then one they're not supposed to, in the Purdue, Rutgers, Northwestern. That's his prediction. So he's learned. I mean, he is like, even at 13, he's like, no, they're going to have a stupid loss that's going to make you crazy.
They're going to have an Illinois loss like they had in 2019,
so
where it just makes no sense.
Clearly, you're part of the consensus and the brain trust. I'm, as I have always been known, I am the ever the optimist on this show. So,
and I don't think they will have a loss like that. They're going to lose a game if they're going to lose a game like that, they'll lose, it'll be in the 30s or something like that. It'll be a competitive loss. I don't see some freaking total brain cramp like Illinois was.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just like, where in the hell did that come from? And I don't see that. I just don't see that happening.
I hope not. That because that was a game they should have won by 2 scores. And they just could not put them away.
So you say they should have? That was they lost as the biggest Big Ten favorite since the 80s in a conference game, since the freaking 80s. That's how wacko that was.
So what you guys called? We lost to Champagne Santa. So
Champagne Santa, that's good. I think I had heard Santa, but I had not heard Champagne Santa for some reason. So anyhow,
all right. So, Lucas, we've done the amazing. You know what we did? We got through 7 teams, including Iowa, and kept Max under an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So I want you to know you're welcome back just for that miracle.
Rich, including Iowa and Wisconsin.
Oh, good. Yeah, no. Iowa is what makes your heart soar. I know what truly gets the heartstrings going with you, Max. So.
We covered it like a blanket.
Yeah. So for our audience, I know we've mentioned it on the pod before, but I am a subscriber and listener to Lucas's podcast. Lucas and Ryan do a very good Like, if what would you call it? Like it's like a top 25 podcast. I mean, it's all of the Power Four, but I mean, like, you know what I mean? Like in terms of what the focus is, I think you guys do a really good job. I like how focused it is. It does not have much hobby horsing talk, just for the record.
I do give me and so we started off. We do give lawn updates.
I was about to say you do talk about the lawn,
especially because Ryan just bought a new home. It's his first lawn that he is taking care of right now too. So we do like to share experiences.
Just for the record, you're way too young for that. Like that shouldn't hit until like 38. Because I will freely admit I am all in on the aeration. That's really critical. And in the Northeast, limestone. Got to keep your pH up. Just so you know. I don't know if that's a situation for you down there, but
I did. I was smart when I bought this house. I got French drains put into the backyard because it does slope a little bit.
Oh yeah.
So that was like the kind of the big thing here. My biggest thing is just I'm in. This is not to get nerdy, but I'm in what's called the transition zone. So you can't fully grow northern grass for the whole year because it gets too hot in the summer.
Yes.
You can't grow southern grass for the whole year.
What is your hardiness zone? What zone are you? Are you like 6? Can you hear everyone unsubscribing to this podcast right now? I can.
Well, now they're like, "Is Running for the Roses a lawn podcast?"
I thought we were the home of the nerds, so I think.
Yeah, like Max is looking at us like, "You two need to wrap up." What are you talking about? And when that happens, that's a bad sign.
I was not.
But yeah, so we do lawn updates, but we also do talk about college football. We cover all the Power Four for the most part. We are trying to do more Group of Five. We're actually doing a thing this year because me and Ryan are huge fans of the college football video game. Played it all the time when we were kids. Obviously, I know that's a sore subject for you, Rich. So one cool segment we are doing this year, we each randomly picked a separate Group of Five team, and we're going to play the season week by week and then follow it in real life week by week and see how it compares to like what we play. So I have UTEP, my friend Ryan. I believe he has, oh my gosh.
Didn't he say Georgia State or something?
Tulsa. He has Tulsa. So you can get that. But yeah, we cover all the Power Four. We also do do a little bit of betting too. So we usually give our favorite picks for the week too. If you listen to our conference previews, we usually give our over/under for win totals for each team and things like that as well. So we like to have a little fun in that regard and lose money like every year. Like,
degenerate gambling and lawn care. Everything you want in a college football podcast.
Exactly.
All right, Ryan, thank you. Lucas, I'm thinking of Ryan. Lucas, thank you for coming on the podcast. Whoever you are. Yeah, thanks again. Seriously, thank you for helping us do this because this summer was kind of crazy schedule-wise for the two of us and getting guests on. And I had a couple guests, like Max reached out to one, I reached out to one, and they're like, "Sorry, man, it's chock-a-block." So you were an amazing pinch hitter, and you came through in the clutch. So thank you for doing that. All right.
I appreciate it. Like I told you on Twitter there, Rich, it was an honor to be on, and thank you, Max, as well for giving me the invitation. Anytime you guys need maybe a more outside perspective or something like that, or any more teams you want to know about, just let me know.
Be careful when you make offers like that. You got it. Because we tend to. Yeah. The cruel acceptance of the casual invitation does happen.
That's right. Anytime, man. Anytime.
On that note, Max, we ready to go? I think
we are good, and let's look forward to Friday, man.
Let's look forward to Friday, everybody.
Actual football.
Get your prop bets in, patreon.com/buckaround. And don't forget to talk around 347-77 Bucky. All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been the Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.
All right. And hold on.
It's Iowa, Max. You have to.
Iowa.
I'm not allowed to talk about Iowa.
I'm looking at the agenda. And
All it is
so,
you
all
can
right, okay.